So, what in the world could a 19th century musical genius and the anonymous creator of Bitcoin possibly have in common? Well, today we're going to dive into a pretty fascinating narrative that draws a direct line between them, presenting Satoshi Nakamoto as a kind of modern-day Beethoven. It sounds a little out there, I know. So let's unpack how this story is told.
And right off the bat, here's the core idea. This one sentence from our source material, the Satoshi Symphony, is the whole premise. It frames Dr. Craig Wright, the man presented as Satoshi, not just as an inventor, but as a Beethovenian hero, a tormented genius. So this isn't just about technology. It's about struggle and art and creating something that lasts forever.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the composer and the coder themselves. Then we'll dive into this idea that their genius was forged in trauma. After that, we'll get into their revolutionary symphonies, the massive vision behind it all, and finally, the epic, unfolding legacy that they both set in motion.
All right, so first up, let's set the stage with our two main characters. On one side, you have Ludwig van Beethoven, the composer who completely shattered the rules of classical music. And on the other side, Dr. Craig Wright, the computer scientist that our source material presents as the man behind the Satoshi Nakamoto name.
So the whole idea here is that even though these two are separated by centuries and worked in totally different fields, they share this fundamental story, the arc of the tormented genius whose brilliance is actually fueled by their hardship. So let's see how this story gets built, starting right from their early years.
And that brings us right to our first big parallel, this idea that their genius was literally forged in trauma. The narrative we're looking at argues that their difficult childhoods weren't just some backstory details. No, they were absolutely essential to understanding the revolutionary work they would go on to create.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how specific these parallels are. For Beethoven, you have this abusive, alcoholic father who brutally forced him to practice piano. The narrative around Wright describes a similarly abusive and belittling father. And check this out. Where Beethoven found his escape and his purpose in music, Wright is said to have found his refuge in the world of code and cryptography taught to him by his grandfather, who was a signals officer in World War II. In both stories, it's about finding a sanctuary and a purpose in your craft.
But for Beethoven, the ultimate trauma, the thing that almost broke him, was going deaf. It started when he was just 27. It completely isolated him and drove him to such despair that he actually wrote a suicide letter, the famous Heiligenstadt Testament, though he never sent it. He felt his entire purpose was to give his music as a gift to the world, but his own body was robbing him of the ability to even share in that gift. This deep sense of isolation and this desperate need to create against all odds is really central to this hero story.
But here's the thing. After hitting that low point, Beethoven didn't just go back to music. He came back and unleashed a revolution. And this is where the narrative draws its most powerful parallel, framing both his defining symphony and the creation of Bitcoin as a complete and total break with the past.
Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica, which means heroic, was that explosion. It was longer, way more complex, and packed with this raw human emotion that nobody had ever heard in a concert hall before. I mean, it single-handedly marks the end of the classical music era and kicks off the Romantic era. It was a complete revolution in sound.
So why was this so revolutionary? Well, you have to remember, before Eroica, music was basically fancy background entertainment for nobles. With this symphony, Beethoven put the artist's own soul, his own struggle, his own emotions right at the very center. All of a sudden, the composer was the hero of the story, and music became this profound personal statement.
And this is the parallel that gets drawn to Bitcoin. According to the source, that first version of the Bitcoin code was its own Eroica. On the surface, it looked like peer-to-peer cash, but hidden inside was the potential for a Turing-complete system, in other words, a global computer. This hidden vision transformed the blockchain from just a simple ledger into a revolutionary new platform for, well, everything.
And this idea of a grand hidden potential wasn't just a one-off thing. The narrative we're exploring frames Satoshi's entire body of work as a series of interconnected symphonies, all part of one single massive vision that was composed with code.
So the progression is laid out like this. First, you have the Third Symphony. That's the original Turing-complete design hidden in Bitcoin. Then comes the fourth, the MetaNet, an idea for a whole new internet built on the blockchain. The fifth is Terranode, the software designed for massive, basically unlimited scaling. And finally, the Sixth Symphony isn't even technology. It's the strategy itself, a 17-year plan to slowly reveal this vision to the world.
And this brings us to the final and maybe the most cinematic piece of the puzzle, this idea of a long, meticulously orchestrated master plan.
You know, just like a composer might spend years crafting their masterpiece, Satoshi is portrayed as this patient genius, quietly executing a 17-year strategy. This timeline really lays out that incredible patience. It kicks off with the white paper in 2008 and the Genesis block in early 2009. Then, you get years of controlled leaks and reveal starting around 2015. And, according to this story, it's all building towards a prophesied apotheosis in 2026, the moment when the very first coins mined are expected to finally move. It's framed as this slow, deliberate drama, unfolding over nearly 2 decades.
So when you really zoom out, the core connection being made here is all about purpose. After his moment of crisis, Beethoven dedicated his life to leaving a gift for humanity, music that could elevate the soul. And the narrative we've explored today presents Satoshi's work in the exact same light, as this grand system, forged from personal struggle, intended to be a lasting gift to the world.
And this final quote from the source material really just ties it all together perfectly. It paints this picture of a creator who is deaf to the world of critics and noise, focused only on this eternal vision, patiently orchestrating a plan that spans decades, all so that one day the encoded truth can finally resonate with everyone.
Which leaves us with a final big question to think about. Is this whole metaphor just a compelling story, or does it hint at something deeper about what creation even means in our digital age? Can a protocol, an algorithm, a system built on pure logic, truly be seen as a work of art on the scale of a symphony? And can its creator be thought of as a composer for our time?